Opening night was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Everyone was running around making certain that things were in the right place and doing their best not to feel nervous. Celia knew from experience that no matter how many plays you had under your belt, no matter the rehearsals, those initial nerves never went away. Not completely. Celia found herself in the hotel pool, swimming laps back and forth as she tried to clear her head. Back, forth, the water pushing away from her and propelling her forwards. Rhythmic and soothing, and complete bullshit. After an hour of trying to calm down, Celia climbed out of the pool and sat with her legs dangling in the water. There was a splash at the other end, and she looked up to see Grayson swimming towards her. Bobby nowhere to be seen for once. "What are you doing here?" Grayson asked, putting his arms on the side of the pool and looking up at Celia. "What does it look like?" she asked, swirling her feet around. "It looks like you're sitting there doing nothing," Grayson said. Celia splashed water at him, and he retreated a few feet, treading water as though he did it all the time. Given his body, he probably did. Celia pushed those thoughts out of her mind, even though she knew them to be harmless. Just because he was dating her friend/boss didn't mean she couldn't admire. Maybe. "I was swimming, just trying to get rid of my nervous energy," Celia admitted. "I know I should have gone for a run, but I haven't done any proper running since coming to Monte Carlo, and I didn't want to hurt myself before we opened." "Rafe would have killed you," Grayson agreed, "though I doubt you would have hurt yourself. I see you running around all the time." "Errands," Celia scoffed. "Back in England, I used to run 4 or 5 miles every other morning." "Only every other morning?" Grayson shook his head in mock disappointment. "You wimp." "Oh, ha, ha," Celia said. She kicked out, sending an arc of water in his direction. He ducked under the water and emerged a moment later, inches away from where she was sitting. "You're getting the jitters out, too?" "Swimming is much safer than weightlifting before opening night," Grayson said. "Besides, this way I can see a pretty woman in a swimsuit." "Speaking of," Celia said, knowing she needed to change the topic or she would be in serious trouble, "where's Bobby?" "I think she said something about having a massage scheduled," Grayson said. Celia nodded. She should have remembered, considering that she'd been the one to schedule the massage. "Thank you, by the way." "For what?" Celia asked. "For the advice," Grayson said. Celia shook her head, wet hair sticking to her face. She brushed it behind her ears and shrugged in confusion. "About Bobby putting on a front. You were right." Celia recalled her words, that Bobby was a good person behind the front she put up, and that if someone cared to look, she would be loyal and true. Celia was glad that Grayson, anyone really, had chosen to look behind Bobby's mask. She was also, for one terrible moment, furious with herself for saying anything. "I'm glad," Celia said, using her wet skin as a pretense to rub her eyes clear. "I mean, I haven't worked with her for all that long, but I'm usually pretty good about these things." "Hey, do you want to come out for lunch with Bobby and me? I got reservations at a place just around the corner, and it's easy enough to change the number of people, and it might help with your nerves," Grayson said. "No," Celia thought while her mouth said the opposite. "I'd love to," she said, "but right now I need a shower. Enjoy your swim." Grayson nodded and dove under the water, moving off gracefully. Celia stood and turned her back to him, grabbing a robe and wrapping it around her. Traitor. Her very mouth had betrayed her, telling her that she wanted to be closer to Grayson, even when the thought of him around Bobby was enough to drive her away. "You're a jealous fool," Celia said, closing the door of her room securely behind her. "You shouldn't even be thinking of such things about him, and yet you are. Idiot." She knew that it was only the fact that she was spending so much time around him that had her acting like a lovesick puppy. Once the play was done and she was off on another adventure, he would fade into nothing more than a pleasant memory, a story to tell around a round of drinks. Celia showered and dressed in a pair of dark leggings and a batwing shirt, a hat over her hair. Then, just in case, she checked her phone, hoping that Rafe or Tony had some sort of task that she needed to do. Even doing something for Bobby that would get her out of lunch would be worth it. Instead, there was nothing, and all Celia could manage was laying on her bed, sulking until someone knocked on her door. Of course, she thought wryly, while putting on a pleasant smile, he would come for her, with Bobby on his arm. "Ready?" Grayson asked, smiling as though he had never heard of such a thing as nerves. "Sure thing," Celia said. "Bobby, that massage must have done you wonders. You're glowing." "Am I?" Bobby asked, blushing with false modesty. She knew she was glowing, and the fact that Celia had acknowledged it put an extra lift in her step. Just what Celia wanted. After all, her job was still Bobby's assistant. She was meant to make certain that Bobby was happy and ready to perform. "Thank you," the actress said, tightening her grip slightly on Grayson's arm. "I have to agree," Grayson said, kissing the top of Bobby's head gently, even as he led the party down the stairs. "You look ravishing." "You're teasing," Bobby said, but the compliment clearly showed in her eyes. "Not when I'm talking the truth," Grayson said. Celia said nothing and was practically ignored for the entire walk to the restaurant. Grayson did hold her chair for her, but his eyes never left Bobby's lovely expression. The conversation over the menu focused solely between the two lovers. Celia ordered from a sympathetic waiter before the others even noticed he was there. Finally, after drinks seemed to magically appear on the table, was Celia brought to the conversation. "So are you coming to the party tonight, in celebration of opening?" I didn't even know there was a party, Celia said. Liar. Tony had only mentioned it 1,000 times, saying that the precious patron was so generous in throwing a party in one of the best bars in town. How nice it was to have money, Tony had said. Celia hadn't said anything, pretending that she couldn't hear. If she ignored it long enough, it would be easier to feign ignorance and skip out. I've reserved a great spot, Grayson said, Bobby nodding eagerly beside him. Good food, better drinks, the works. So consider this your formal invitation, and if you don't show up, I'll come and hunt you down personally. You shouldn't take such trouble, Celia joked, despite the fact that her plans for a quiet night had been trashed. She sipped at her good wine and wished that Bobby would stop looking at her like that, like rotten meat getting ever closer. Why not? You're part of the cast, and crew for that matter, so you're doubly essential to the party, Grayson said. Celia shook her head and searched her mind desperately for a change of subject. How about we go get you a new dress after lunch, Bobby, asked Celia, her smile pleasant and beautiful, but her eyes flashing. Girls only, of course. I wouldn't want to get in the way of that, Grayson held up his hands. Celia nodded, knowing full well that she couldn't refuse. She had been so careful these past few days, weeks even, to make sure that Bobby had no cause to be jealous or think Celia was trying to get close to Grayson North. Turns out she needn't have bothered. He was doing a good enough job of making Bobby jealous without assistance. Perfect, Bobby said, clapping her hands together. As if it were some magical signal, the waiter reappeared with food. Celia did her best to try and become invisible, losing herself in the food. Her nerves were still present, but they no longer had anything to do with opening night. Everything was to do with the shopping trip with Bobby and a party at which her presence was more or less demanded. It was going to be a long day, Celia thought. After lunch, Bobby kissed Grayson thoroughly, then pushed him in the direction of the hotel, waiting until he was gone from view before turning to Celia and threading her arm through that of her assistant. What do you think you're doing, Bobby asked, her words venomous behind her gracious smile. Trying to keep out of trouble, Celia said honestly. You'd better keep away from North, Bobby said, her nails digging just a bit too much into Celia's arm. He's friendly, but we wouldn't want him getting the wrong impression, would we? There's no wrong impression to get, Celia insisted. I haven't done anything except a few conversations with him and now lunch with you two. Oh, really? Bobby said flatly. So meeting up with him that day at the Japanese gardens was just a coincidence? And what about the pool this morning? Another coincidence? That's all it was, Celia took a deep breath. We just happened to be in the same place at the same time. You have nothing to worry about. Not from me. Good. Bobby's smile was more sincere now. It didn't fool Celia. She was fully aware of the danger lurking beneath the surface. Because North is going to take me away from here. With him behind me, I'm going to go far. Very far. No more jumping from impossibly small theater company to company. I won't need to audition. Roles will just fall into my lap. But you see, none of that can happen if you get in the way. And if you get in the way, I'll make sure that you never see another job like this. You'll never act again. I didn't want to act to begin with, Celia murmured. Bobby pulled her aside and put her hands on her hips. What do you mean you didn't want to act? Bobby hissed the question to keep anyone from overhearing. Celia shrugged. She pulled her hat farther onto her head and folded her arms, uncomfortable. I didn't want the acting post. Rafe only offered it to me because I already knew the lines and blocking, and he didn't want to have to audition another girl so close to the show, Celia explained. She scoffed and shook her head. If it were up to me, which it never is, I'd just be your assistant and working with Tony on the costumes. Nothing else. Well, Bobby took a step back, her expression thoughtful and lifted at the same time. That changes things. Does it? Celia asked. I'm glad, because really, truly, Bobby, I don't want this. I'm happy to do whatever you want, fetch coffee, deal with your dry cleaning, whatever. But being on stage, I'd rather skip that. I think we understand one another better than I thought, Graham, Bobby said. I'm going to go shopping. Now, I expect you to return to the hotel in 1 hour, address in hand. Just because I'm not going with you doesn't mean that you can't show up to that party with a new dress. We wouldn't want North thinking I abandoned you, would we? No, Celia shook her head and nodded, and Bobby nodded, tossing her hair just enough to catch the sun. Celia, though, wanted to shrink into the shadows and remain invisible. Things were much, much easier then. Bobby turned on her exquisite shoes and walked off, disappearing into the crowds on the streets of Monte Carlo. Celia looked up at the sky and wished for the day to be over.